This is Caitlin, your host of the No Sleep for Dramas podcast, where we get no sleep and survive on coffee to watch just one more episode at night. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the No Sleep for Dramas podcast. We are doing a Breaking with Variety episode. I feel like I haven't done one of these in a while, but as you guys can tell from the title, I needed to do a podcast episode on this. If you follow me on social media, you will know how obsessed I am with this show. I needed to do a review because I want other people to know about this show and to watch this show and to talk to me about this show because it's a fantastic show. And what show am I talking about? I am talking about the cooking competition show on Netflix called Culinary Class Wars. This is going to be a final review. I've watched every single episode. As I said on my social media, I probably could have binged this show in like a day, but I paced myself because I had other things to finish for other podcast episodes. But the way I ate this show up, I just gobbled it all up and I got invested. No pun intended in any of those eating statements. You guys know from my social media, I love this show. I gushed about this show. Of course, I'm going to do a review on this show. I did announce it in the previous episode, or maybe 2 episodes ago on my podcast, I was going to do a review. Here it is. If you have never heard of Culinary Class Wars, buckle up, get a drink, sit back. This will be your introduction to it. This review is also a blog post on my blog, so you can follow along on my blog as well. There's links to the MDL in that blog post, things like that. I knew I was going to like this show, but I did not expect how much I got invested and loved it. The reason I introduced the Breaking with Variety series on here is for people to know more about these shows, different genres of variety shows, or different countries that do variety reality TV shows. I mean, there's a vast pool of reality TV / variety shows you can watch from all the Asian countries. And I feel like not a lot of people talk about them. I feel like not a lot of people watch them, except for the K-pop ones. So you miss out on things like a cooking show or a romance show. Breaking with Variety series exists on this podcast for this reason, for people to go and learn about these shows from the podcast and then go and watch them and then tell me what you think. Because a lot of drama watchers don't watch variety shows or don't watch reality TV unless like an actor or a K-pop idol is in it. And then they go watch it, maybe. But sometimes people don't know about them or don't know where to watch them or anything. That's why Breaking with Variety exists on the podcast. This is the review for Culinary Class Wars. Now, I will say that I will not be spoiling this show on this podcast episode. I will not be talking about the winner, but I will be mentioning certain things like a particular chef or maybe describing a certain round, not the results of the round, but the setup of the round. I'm not going to say anything that's actually in the show. But for example, if I said, oh, round 2 is where they had to race to a different building and had to pick a numbered door and whatever was behind that door they had to use. They didn't do that in this show, but that would be the description I would give. I wouldn't say who won. I wouldn't even say what chef was on what team or whatever. But I'll maybe describe a challenge or say, okay, in this challenge they had to work with a particular ingredient or do whatever. That is how I will be quote unquote spoiling this show. So if that is considered spoiling to you, where you don't even want to know the format of a challenge, I would say go watch this show first and then come back to my review. Or if you don't even want to know if a round was a team round versus a solo round, go and watch the show first and then come back to my review. I'm not going to spoil, if you consider spoilers who won the show or what chef won a round or what team won a round, I won't be revealing any of that type of stuff. So that's not the type of spoilers I will be talking about. I will kind of give generic ideas and thoughts about that, but I'm not going to say anything like who won the entire show or who won the round or who won whatever. Also, there's so many chefs in this show. I don't remember all of them because there's 100. Speaking of that, here is a quick synopsis of Culinary Class Wars, especially if you have never heard of this show. Culinary Class War among 100 contenders, where an 80 underdog quote-unquote black spoon cooks challenge 20 quote-unquote white spoon star chefs, fiercely competing to become the best in Korea. I took that straight from my drama list. I did not summarize it or change anything from it or whatever. That is taken word for word from my drama list because I thought that described it pretty well. But that's pretty much the show. They pitted chefs against each other, basically. That's what the show was. I'll get into more description after what I talk about. My overall review of this show. You have to know right now I love this show. I mean, again, I talked about this a lot on social media, both TikTok, messaging, Instagram, whatever. I talked a lot about this show. And when I do that, when I talk about a lot about a show, that means I usually like it. Sometimes I criticize it, but usually when that happens, I like it because I'm commenting on things that happen while I watch it. I was a little late to this. I did not watch the show as it aired. I'm glad I didn't, though, because I would be dying if I was trying to watch this weekly. I'm so glad I waited until all the episodes were out. Because as I said, I had to force myself not to binge this show. I was so glad I decided to wait and not try and watch this weekly because I would be clawing for the next episode. Especially with how much I love it. Due to the fact I love this show, though, I really have nothing bad to say about it. I mean, there's a couple minor things at the end of the review that I'll talk about, but overall, they're really minor. It didn't really affect my score. A little background on me, I love cooking competition shows. I think I've seen almost every popular one you can find in the US and even some British cooking shows. It is not very surprising. I like this show. And when Netflix announced this show, I immediately knew I was going to check it out and I was probably going to enjoy it. Just because my track record with these types of shows already. I loved watching the chefs cook and the food they produced. Overall, there isn't a lot of angst with this show unless you really want a particular person to win and you have to wait and see if they win or lose or get through a challenge or whatever. But overall, there's not much, there's competition, there's intense competition, but there's not much dirty-handed competition. I wouldn't say there's a zero, but there's minimal dirty-handed competition. I think it's overall a healthy competition. It's intense, and it definitely is cutthroat, but I would say it's healthy. And when a show's like that, where it's not a lot of backstabbing or anything, I tend to like those more, and this doesn't really have a ton of backstabbing. I did have favorites, and I got very invested in this show. Did a lot of my favorites win? Did a lot of my favorites even get through round one? No. Think of this as like you can have a lot of favorites, but don't be surprised if they lose and leave. Because, especially during the beginning, because at the beginning, you start with 100 chefs and they cut, I think it was half, maybe 3/4 of them already. I can't remember. I'd have to look back, but they cut a huge chunk out in the first round. I also like this show because it had a lot of variety in each round and the challenges were different. They were different enough that it didn't bore me. If you're looking for something new to watch, or if you've never checked out an Asian variety reality show, I would recommend this one. I would try it out. My main advice, if you are somebody who has never checked out an Asian variety show or Asian reality TV, Think of the reality TV genres and reality TV shows you normally watch in the US or Britain or wherever you live. Try to find Asian variety shows or reality TV shows in the same genre you already watch. I grew up loving cooking competition shows or just shows on food in general. I still do. A lot of the American TV I still watch are these cooking competition shows like Chopped or Iron Chef or whatever. It's easy for me to know that I'll like a show like this, Culinary Class Wars. My recommendation is if you are trying to get into these types of shows more, check ones out that you know that are in a genre that you will already like. Or if you know a certain celebrity is in that show, maybe check out their episode. And I'll talk about that later in like another podcast episode. But that's one of my recommendations when people want to get into this is find a show that's in the same genre of shows you already are watching and you already like. And that way it's an easier transition. If you like food competition shows, I would highly recommend this one. All right, so let's get into what I liked about this show. First off, the setup. So, when a show starts with 100 people and there can only be one winner, the show is about to be intense and brutal. The show starts off with 100 chefs split into two groups. You have 80 chefs that are the black spoons or ordinary cooks in Korea, or ordinary cooks in general. They weren't all just cooking in Korea. They're considered underdog chefs because the white spoons are the celebrity chefs. You have 80 chefs who are the black spoons. They're your ordinary people. They might own their own restaurants. They might have worked in a various restaurants or cuisines, or some were even famous within their own community or had a YouTube channel that they're really popular on. There was even variety within the black spoons where there were people who were unknown and some people who were celebrities in their own right, just not as famous as the white coats. Then you have 20 chefs of the white spoons who were celebrity chefs, the famous chefs, people the Koreans would recognize because they've been on a bunch of food shows or became famous. Their restaurants are Michelin star restaurants, that type of thing. And the show basically whittles down the 80 black coat chefs to 20 and then pit those 20 black coats against the 20 white coat chefs. And eventually it goes down to one winner overall. That's how pretty much the setup is. And I think the show did a really good job on not favoring the black chefs over the white coated chefs. They pretty much did an even playing field, which I'll explain later. But you learned a lot about both teams and you grew invested in chefs from both teams. It wasn't just rooting for the underdogs and that's it. Depending on where your interests were and who caught your eye, you rooted for them. And I think also just having the variety of just not having all celebrity chefs and mixing them in with underdog chefs or who you might consider underdog, I think it brings a sense of relatability to it where you're not just watching these really super famous chefs cook. You have these other chefs that you can relate to who might have been building a restaurant from the ground up, and you might have done that yourself in your own business, or they might have had a family situation that you relate to. It's a good mix of personalities and people. The next thing I like is the challenges. I think the show did a good job on creating the challenges. You had a good variety. Some were individual challenges where the chefs were cooking for themselves. They were graded on their own food. You had other challenges that were team challenges where the chefs had to work together to provide a meal to a group of people or make sure that they made a certain number of plates of a dish of a certain kind using certain ingredients. They had a variety of challenges that catered to strengths and weaknesses, and you saw that play out. You had some group challenges that were difficult for a certain group of people versus maybe the individual challenges were better suited for this group of people. It allowed these chefs to shine in certain areas and not shine in other areas. And I think that contributed to having a little more equal playing field when you have celebrity chefs versus underdog chefs. Each challenge also had a different meaning to the chefs. One of the challenges was make a dish that represented their life, and it was an individual challenge. You had these chefs make one dish in a course of, I think it was like 70 or 80 minutes that represented them. And then you learned about their personal lives and about their backstory and why they chose this dish. You learned more about the chefs, which got you more invested in those chefs. And then you might have another challenge where it's like an introduction to themselves at the very beginning, where they are just making a dish that they introduce themselves, and it's 100 people introducing themselves with one dish, and they might get axed right after somebody tries that dish because they need to cut like half of these chefs. So I think each challenge had a different meaning to the chefs and allowed the chef to show a different talent and a different creative side of them. And I think, as I said, I thought each challenge allowed the audience to learn more about the chefs, especially as the group got smaller and smaller. And it allowed me to discover favorites and get more invested in the show. And I thought the challenges created enough variety where I did not get bored as the show went on, which you want. The food. I talked about this a little bit already, but I like the variety. You got the variety for a lot of different reasons. One, you got chefs from all walks of life, as I was talking about before. You got celebrity chefs, you got people who are a lot older but have been running a restaurant, but they're a local phenomenon. They're not well known. Or you have chefs that are just starting out, you know? Or you have chefs that went abroad and learned a different cuisine entirely. You have chefs with different expertise who might be known for their butchering skills, but have no idea what to do with a vegetable. You have celebrity chefs that have been cooking for 40 years and are known for really good cooking. And then you have chefs that I just got out of school. All of this contributed to a variety of food because you had different generations as well. You might have had a challenge where everybody had to cook the same dish, but it was interpreted different because of the chef that was cooking it. All these chefs overall were very talented, in my opinion. They just contributed differently in how they used an ingredient, how creative they were, or how they weren't creative, because then they got eliminated. It just contributed to the variety of food you got. How somebody used one ingredient was different from the person next to them, especially if one was an Italian chef and the other was a Korean chef, you know? And as the show went on, it was fun to see how these chefs handled these challenges and what they did to stand out with their food and creativity without them. Like what chefs took risks and what chefs played it safe. I personally enjoyed the chefs that took more risks and were more creative. It might not have worked out with them in the end. They might have got eliminated because the risk was too high, but I appreciated that they took that risk. I also love the chefs that have more of a humble beginning, and you learn more about these chefs as the show goes on. There's a couple chefs that I became attached to due to their backstory. And that I feel like that seems to happen even with drama characters. I tend to like the drama characters that are more quiet and have a little more humble beginnings than super celebrity characters. That's just me. Speaking of chefs, the other thing I liked were the chefs. Like the food, I also enjoyed there were a variety of chefs. I personally rooted for the underdogs or the people that surprised the judges. Sometimes these chefs, the judges came in with a preconceived notion of what they were expecting, and then they tasted the dish and they're like, this dish came from you? What the heck? Like, what? I didn't expect this pairing to work right. How did this work? What do you mean this is what it's supposed to be? I liked that surprise. I rooted for that type of thing to happen, and when that did happen, the chefs that performed that way, I wanted them to progress. You had to stand out, basically. What I'm saying is these chefs had to stand out because they were competing against 99 other chefs. And a lot of them were Korean food chefs. So, like, they had to cook Korean food and stand out with like majority of other Korean food chefs. You did have other mixed in, like people who were versed in other cuisines, but overall it was a Korean food show. Some of these people surprised me because they came out of nowhere. Like in the first episode, there's so many people you weren't introduced to every single one of them. And then all of a sudden they made it to round 2 and you're like, who is this person? And then you got to learn about them more. They tried to showcase as many people as possible. But just due to the sheer number of 100 people starting out, there's only so many you could feature, especially in an hour episode. And you might think because this is a Korean cooking show, all the chefs were Korean cooking Korean food. That's not really the case. You had chefs from different nationalities like Italian or Chinese or Japanese on the show. You had chefs that were Korean but knew and trained in Italian cuisine or Japanese cuisine or Chinese cuisine. So you had a good variety of cuisines and nationalities on the show as well. You had different ages, you had different years of experience. You had chefs that were well known in social media, as I said, or chefs who were a lot older who might own like a hole in the wall restaurant that had been operating for 50 something years. You had Michelin star chefs against mom and pop restaurant chefs. Like there was just a chef for everybody to root for and get attached to, which I appreciated. I appreciated that because it allowed me to enjoy it more by being exposed to different chefs who thought about a challenge in a different way and also interpreted a certain dish or a certain ingredient in a different way. Because you might be like during a team challenge, you might have 3 Chinese cuisine chefs. Will they work together or will they just kind of not? And then that will be the destruction of that team challenge. Or because they're a Chinese cuisine chef or a Japanese cuisine chef, maybe they're known for their good knife skills or something. Or fine dining is known for their good knife skills. Each chef brought certain skills and expertise to the show. So it was interesting to see how they used that to win the challenges and how that made them stand out as the show went on. Hopefully I'm making sense there. Another thing I liked about the show are the judges. The show had 2 judges. Now, I personally only knew one of them when I clicked play on this because he is extremely famous in Korea. He is a TV chef. He has hosted a ton of shows. He is everywhere. He's a businessman. He has food brands. Netflix has a ton of his food shows. I have watched, I think, 1, and there's like 7 of them or something. The chef, his name is Bak Jung-won. He is everywhere, and he's older. He's at least in his 50s, if not older. He's been around for a long time. The other judge, An Sung-jae, isn't known for being on television as far as I can tell, but he's known for being Korea's only Michelin 3-star chef. So that is why he was on the show. And this kind of explains a little bit. I mean, this is explained in the show. Like they introduce the people, you get to know a little about them, but the show also explains why these 2 people were judges. Bak Jung-won is known as a television host who traveled a lot and can relate a lot more to the black spoons, your everyday sort of chef. An Sung-jae caters more towards the white spoons, the Michelin star chefs that are on that team, or the celebrity chefs. As judges, you will have 2 different people looking at for 2 different things in the dishes they are tasting. And so they'll enjoy different things. You'll have the Michelin star judge criticizing and really painstaking look at some like a chef's knife skills, for example. But you might have Bak Jung-won really appreciate people who go out of the box and surprise them, which might not An Sung-jae might not like because he's a fine dining chef. It was an interesting dynamic with these 2, and I really appreciated them because you could tell the show tried to cater to both of the types of chefs that are on this show to give them a more even playing field. You're not just having Michelin star judges grading and judging people who have never been trained before in their life. There was some chefs on the Black Spoons that had never been to culinary school. You don't want to judge looking at their knife skills because they might have taught themselves and that might have been like professionally trained. A Michelin star chef might be really critical of their knife skills, or a Michelin star chef might not appreciate the creativity that someone brings because they tried something and took a risk and did a combination with ingredients that in a Michelin star chef's mind would never work because they went to culinary school, you know? I appreciated that because they could look at different things, appreciate different things, and you would still enjoy the show. Again, relatability. I thought the judges overall had good insight. They graded things differently, but were a lot of fun to watch because they played off of each other. They were strict. Like, even Bak Jung-won was strict. Like, he wasn't just like it wasn't the dynamic of An Sun-jae was strict and ruthless, and then Bak Jung-won was the fun judge. They sort of had that dynamic at the beginning, but as the show progressed, you understood they were still at the level that they were, and they were invited onto the show as a judge because they were good at what they were doing. They were good at chefs. They'd been in the profession for a while. They knew what they were talking about. I felt like they were good choices for this show, had a good dynamic working off of each other, and because they differed on what they were looking at, it created an interesting process of judging. Because some of the challenges by the end, they had to be unanimous in their decision, which was hard because they were looking at different things. I thought that was fun. Also, if you have never seen Bak Jung-won or An Sung-jae, you learned more about them and their career through this show, so you might want to go check out some of Bak Jung-won's other shows, for example. Two more things I liked. The production. Netflix put a ton of money into this show. They built everything. The sets were grand. The scale of the show was massive. The show also showed that the production wanted to be as fair as possible, especially with the judging. They did blind tasting in some of the challenges because they didn't want to be biased of a chef with 35 years of experience and 3 Michelin stars cooked something versus a person who just got out of school. They tried to make the judging as fair as possible when it needed to be, which was fun because then they were blind tasting it and they chose a dish and they realized the guy that had graduated school 6 months prior beat a Michelin star chef. It was a lot of fun, which it made it exciting because you never knew who would win and get out of these challenges or who would do badly or not so badly. There was good surprises in the show. And it was just impressive with the amount of money and what the production put into this show. It was exciting to see, oh, that challenge was already so impressive. How could they top that? How could they go further with that? What ingredients will the chefs use? The chefs were using top tier ingredients in this show. The amount of money put in just to the ingredients was insane. Production went all out in this show, and you can see it in the show. The last thing I'll say, because I started this show later and I could binge it, I then proceeded to follow all of my favorite chefs on social media. It was a lot of fun seeing their posts or like going back into their social media because the show had already ended and see their posts from when they were on the show. But also, they were posting premiere parties, or we watched episode 1 together, or you got reunions. Like, I think 4 or 5 chefs did like a restaurant opening a week after the show ended or something, or a special night where they sold tickets and cooked the 4 of them together for those 400 people who bought tickets, whatever. You got reunions. I'm curious to see what these chefs will do next, if they'll join another food show because now they're all pretty famous, or if they'll open another location of their restaurant, or if they'll start a restaurant. I'll be curious to see what they do in the future, and because I follow them on social media, I'll know that. This review is going to be a little on the shorter side, but that's okay. Now we're going to move into what could have been better. I have 4 things that I think could have been better for this show. One is it's not really a bad thing, but this show is getting a season 2. I don't think Netflix really anticipated it being as popular as it was. I mean, it was number 1 on Netflix in Korea for weeks on end, and the same was international. And so I think pretty much, I can't remember if the show had completed airing or it was like about to air the last 1 or 2 episodes. Netflix announced they were planning on doing a season 2. We now know that they are planning on doing a season 2 and they are planning on releasing it in 2025, as far as I know. That's a good thing that there's going to get a season 2. I just have to wait for season 2. That's the bad thing about it. Because now I'm curious because it's so popular now. I think I read an article, like, due to the show, everybody who was on the show within a certain number, like top 20 or something, got boosts in social media followings, and the reservations for the restaurants were booked out months and months and months or whatever. Like, everybody who was kind of on the show and for a certain period of time saw a boost in their business and everything due to being on the show. That's how popular this show was. I'm curious if season 2 will kind of, okay, season 1 was so good, how are we going to top that and kind of go even further with the budget and production or whatever. So we'll see. Another thing I think could have been better, this was a minor thing, but some chefs did play a little dirty. I won't say who, and I won't say what challenge, but there was a certain instant. I only remember one time in the show. It's 12 episodes, and only one time in 12 episodes, there were some chefs that played dirty, and I didn't particularly like that. In that instance, I didn't feel like it needed to happen. I felt like the chefs who did play dirty, it came off of me to me as arrogant, on like, we deserve to play dirty because we are the person that we are. I didn't particularly like that. I'd rather they hadn't played dirty and treated the other team as equals. It was during a team challenge, and it was the only time that happened on the show, but it left a very bad taste in my mouth afterwards for those specific chefs who played dirty. I did not like them for the rest of the show. I wish that kind of never happened, especially because in my opinion, it didn't really need to happen. It wasn't like they were on a timer and they only had 5 minutes left, so they played dirty. They really didn't need to. There was no reason for them to play dirty other than arrogance, really. I didn't particularly like that part. Another thing I did not like, I wanted to know more about some of the chefs. I understand that the show started out with 100 chefs, so you could not know about every single chef on the show, especially if the chef left in the first round, but I do wish we got a little more information on some of the chefs that got farther in the show. I felt like some of the chefs we got information on, the others we kind of got the bare minimum. It didn't seem even to me, but it also wasn't like, oh, my favorites, we didn't know anything about them. This isn't like a bias thing. I didn't think they played favorites or anything on what you learned and didn't learn, but I enjoyed so much what I did learn about these chefs in terms of their personal lives and how they attack a problem or their backstory or something. I don't think we got some as detailed of a backstory or their life on some chefs versus others. Like, I kind of wanted a little more information, in my opinion. It's a little selfish. Again, now you understand why these were really minor and didn't really affect my score. The last thing I'll say that I wish was better was I wish there was a little more mentoring, both by the judges but also by the senior chefs. I understand it was a competition. I understand why that wasn't really a thing. But one thing I wanted was, as the show got to the smaller number of chefs, I wish there was a little more mentoring. You have 2 famous chefs as judges. I wish they kind of could have mentored a little more. Both the celebrity chefs as well as the black spoons, the everyday chefs. I think they could have given insight to the celebrity chefs as much as they could have given insight to the black spoons as well. And also selfishly, I kind of would have liked the celebrity chefs to mentor a bit. But again, I understand there was a competition involved. They obviously didn't want to mentor the black spoons and then get beaten by the people they mentored. Maybe it's more of not mentoring, but I guess like wholesome interaction. I guess that's what I'm more wanting. Because we did get some. If we got some chefs who beat other chefs, we had some wholesome moments of consoling the person who lost or asking for their social media or something. I guess I want more wholesome stuff, wholesome interactions, or just the chefs getting to know each other a little bit. I don't know. There was something a little missing when it came to mentoring or wholesome moments. I'm not really sure how to put it, but that's kind of what I felt was a little missing a little bit. But overall, the show is a 10 out of 10 for me. I will say my thoughts on the end of the show, no spoilers. I was happy with who won the entire competition. The person who won was not my favorite from the beginning. I was not rooting for them at the beginning of the show. I will say though, I think one of the reasons I wasn't rooting for them is we didn't really learn much about them at first. But as the show went on, we did. I think that's why I was kind of talking above where I wish we had gotten more information on some of the chefs. I think sometimes, at least for me, when I'm watching a show and I learn about somebody's background and I relate to it or something touches me emotionally, I tend to root for those chefs more. So the fact that the person who won this competition I didn't know much about at the beginning says a lot to me. But I did grow to like them a lot by the end. I wasn't mad with who won the competition, the entire competition. I also was actually pretty surprised by the end because I did not picture either person who made it into the final round to be there. I was not anticipating that pair up at all. I won't say go and elaborate on that, but that's kind of my thoughts on the end with no spoilers is I was happy with who won. But yeah, that's my review of Culinary Class Wars. 10 out of 10. You can watch this on Netflix. Please go watch this on Netflix. Please. Do yourself a favor and go watch this on Netflix. It deserves a 10 out of 10. I'm so glad we're getting a season 2. Could I nitpick a bunch of stuff off this show? Yeah, but I would probably be spoiling a ton, and I don't want to do that. Do I also need to do that? No, not really. Will you have favorites if you watch this show? Absolutely. You will definitely have a favorite chef. Let me know who that favorite person is, though. Please, if you watch this show, please DM me and tell me of who you like and who you dislike and what you think. If you like Culinary Class Wars once you have watched it, or you are looking for other shows if you've already watched it, I would recommend things like Delicious Rendezvous or Ginny's Kitchen. Both of these are not competition shows, but they're still fun and entertaining, centered around food. If you like Delicious Rendezvous or Ginny's Kitchen and you have not watched Culinary Class Wars, maybe try this one out. It's a different type of food show. But as I said, if you have not watched the show yet, now is the perfect time. Go and click play. Or you can wait until season 2 is out and then binge both seasons. But that's my opinion. You should just go click play. Like, you might be like me and it'd be really, really hard to not binge this show in like a day and a half. Anyway, that is my review of Culinary Class Wars. 10 out of 10. Did you watch this show? Did you watch Culinary Class Wars? If you did, please let me know what you thought. Is it on your list to watch? Is it on your list now that you listened to my review? Let me know. Do you agree with my review if you've already seen this show? Also, if you have already seen this show, what other food-related variety shows or reality TV shows, Asian ones, would you recommend to other people? I'm curious about that as well. that is my review. That is my review of Culinary Class Wars. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Breaking with Variety, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye. If you want to continue the conversations about dramas that were started in this episode, you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter under the username No Sleep for Dramas. That is No Sleep, the number 4 dramas, just like in the title of the podcast. This podcast is also an expansion of my blog, so you can visit my blog at www.nosleep4dramas.com, the number 4 dramas.com, and find multiple years of blog posts already available at your fingertips. All links are in the description of this episode. This has been an episode of the No Sleep for Dramas podcast, and I am your host, Caitlin. I will see you here next time, and I hope you get no sleep chasing the next episode just like me. Good night.